We are still in the book of Luke. We've been in the book of Luke for a while now, and we're still in it, and we're going to be in it for a little bit longer. I'm not tired of Luke, though. I'm tired of this graphic that's been on the screen for 3 months now. But I'm not tired of Luke because it just has so many great things in it. Last week, we celebrated our Easter Sunday, and it was a great day. Bruce said we had about 307 people, and it was truly great to be together. And for Easter, we were still in the book of Luke, and we talked about the prodigal son and how this idea of resurrection is really just an expression of God's love for us in the life of Jesus, in the death of Jesus, in the resurrection of Jesus, and how Jesus ascended to the right hand of God, and he stands king over everything. And I talked about how really the resurrection is the only thing. The kingship of Jesus is the only thing that has the power to put us back together. It has the power to put us as individuals back together, but it has the power to put our church, our nation, our community, everything on earth back together. It is the super glue of the theological world. And so this is why for this month, really, yes, we're still in the book of Luke, but for this month, we're really going to have an Easter month. And I know what you're saying. You're saying, Joel, you can't do that. 2 weeks ago, that was Palm Sunday, then it's Easter, and then you got to move on. And I told you last week, I don't follow the rules well. So here we are this morning, and we're going to have a month where we look at really the Easter story because it is what puts us back together. Last year, we did a series on King Jesus, and I really want to start today by just coming back to this idea that we were made to serve and worship a king. And I want to prove this to you, not just, from a Christian perspective, but from a worldly perspective. We see this. Now, we live in America, and we have no king, we have no queen, we don't live in a monarchy. We know that kind of doesn't really work that well, just given some history. But yet, why are we so fascinated with the royal family? It's in the news, there's Oprah interviews about this, and yet it's not our king and queen. It's not our royal family. Well, why are we so obsessed with this? And maybe it's not you, but we see it in our nation. It's because somewhere within us we're wired, we were made, we were formed to honor and serve a king. Well, maybe it's not the royal family that gets you, but maybe it's the celebrities. And for those older people looking down on this scene right now, hey, you remember the 60s, right? The Beatles, there was all of this obsession about these bands and this, celebrities and all of this thing going on back then. And there's this same obsession today with celebrities. And why is this? Because I think in a fundamental way, we were made to worship and serve a king, and where we don't have one, we might find one. We might create one. We might pay attention to one. We might elevate one to the status of king. And so this is why when you're checking out at the grocery store and you see the tabloids and you see Brad and Jen back together, they want a baby, and you're like, well, this is why this is so forefront at the center of our culture is this idea of celebrity and elevating that. And the guys in the room are thinking, no, I don't get involved in any of that, right? There's nobody out there that you watch on a weekly basis or read articles about or, find any stat you can find or celebrate any athlete or wear any jersey. Okay, maybe there's a few. And so we elevate sometimes athletes to be these figures that we, in a sense, worship. And since we take their advice, we follow them. And even in psychology, we see this term called celebrity worship syndrome. It's actually a thing where people have a syndrome where they are so eager to worship celebrities that it becomes a problem in their life. Now, I say all of that just to say that we were made to worship and serve a king. We just have to worship the right king and worship the right God and elevate the right person. And we know that that is King Jesus because he is the one that serves at the forefront of everything in our life. Now, how do you make a king? How do you form royalty? How do you become a king? Well, I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, if you didn't know this. And so the movies that I watch at my house are usually somewhat related to Disney. So we were watching the new Aladdin, and he says, I want to be a prince. And how do you make a prince? Well, don't you know that you make a prince with a parade, with dancers, with elephants, with, it looks like a camel formed out of flowers, where he stands at the top and he elevates himself above everyone else, and he says, look at that face. He's like, look how great I am. This is what in our eyes of our world is the idea of a king. And he comes, and what else is a king? It's wealth, and so he comes with golden camels. And apparently, if you watch the new ones, it also comes with lots of jams. But I don't quite know what the jams are all about. This is the world's idea of a king. And a king comes, and he commands all attention, worship, and obedience to him. This is the role of a king. All eyes are focused on him. And yet, when we look at Jesus, it's a different picture. Jesus comes in the world, and he doesn't come with fancy robes. He doesn't come with camels or elephants or dancers or jams. He comes dressed simply. And, maybe the thing that is the same is he does demand all attention, all worship, and all authority be given to him. And when we watch the life of Jesus, especially just as it continues to progress, we get to Luke chapter 19, and there's this change that happens in Luke 19. Now, if you remember just all the way through Luke, and especially in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is constantly downplaying his deity, his kingship. And so he tells people, don't go tell anyone about me. Don't go tell them that this miracle is. And when people begin to gather, he goes, okay, I'm going to a distant countryside, and nobody can follow me there. And it's over and over and over again. He's kind of putting a lid on who he is. We get to Luke chapter 19, and all of a sudden, he just takes off the lid. And I want you to see it firsthand how this happens, because first he tells a few of his disciples to go. He says, now I want you to go, and I want you to get this colt, which is the male donkey. You go and get it and just take it. It's the first time he's like, what, Jesus? You just want us to go steal this donkey? And he's like, yeah, why? Well, that's kind of what a king would do, right? Everything is his. And so he asks them to go and take the donkey. And by the way, when the people ask, why are you taking our donkey, which, by the way, had never been ridden before, just say, the Lord needs it, and it'll work. I don't know if that's a Jedi mind trick of sorts. The Lord needs it. And they just take it. Okay. And he gets it back, and Jesus has the disciples put their coats on the donkey. Again, why? Because he is king. And he gets on it, and he begins to ride. By the way, who can ride an animal that has never been broken before? King Jesus. And he begins to ride this donkey through the streets leading up to Jerusalem. And I want to play just a quick video. I want to describe this as we go. But I want you to have a picture of the scene that is happening. You see Jesus on this donkey. He's not elevated above the crowd. Instead, he's just maybe a little bit above them. People aren't distant. He's not high above everyone else. Instead, he is among the people. And they look at him, their gaze is transfixed on him. They can only see him, and what's interesting about it is, in this depiction, Jesus, his gaze is firmly on them. It's not about gaining control or authority or how great he is as he stands above the people. Instead, he's looking each person in their eyes. He's shaking hands. He's among the people, caring for them, letting them know that God cares about them and that Jesus himself is there among them. They lay down their palm branches, they bow down before him and put their coats down to honor King Jesus. Now, this scene is something interesting, because when we think of the triumphal entry, we think of a king. And there's something powerful about it. There's something amazing about it, but there's also something humble about it. Do you see it? And Luke describes this in chapter 19, and he says this: when he came near the place where the road goes down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest. Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." "I tell you," he replied, "if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." And so he's going down this street, and we see kind of what that looks like and how they're bowing down. But what we don't get is they begin calling out this quote. This is a prophecy about the Messiah coming, about King Jesus coming, about the God who is coming to earth. And they say, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord." And so they're calling Jesus King. They're saying, this is the one who has come from God, peace in heaven and glory in the highest. And so they're elevating Jesus up as the Messiah and as the King. And the Pharisees are concerned. No, you can't worship anybody but God. You can't bow down before anybody but God. Don't put the palm branches down. This isn't God. And in typical, Jesus was sort of diminishing his role, and the Pharisees turn to him and say, "Stop them. They're worshiping you." Jesus says, "I won't do it. Because if I stopped them, then the creation itself would cry out in worship of this moment right here." And so we have this huge moment, this amazing moment. And it's a moment of triumph. It's a moment of victory. It's a moment of a king's procession. And it's immediately followed by just this sad moment. In verse 41, Jesus is getting closer to Jerusalem, and as he sees it, he weeps over it. And he says, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace. But now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you." And so on one side, we've got this moment of great victory and triumph, and immediately it turns into sadness as Jesus sees Jerusalem. Now, why? It's because they don't get it. The parade is over as he comes to Jerusalem. They aren't celebrating him as king. They don't see him as king. They aren't saying, "Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord." Instead, they are still wrapped up in their sin. They are still wrapped up in themselves. And so he sees them, and it's this moment of prophecy in which he says, listen, bad things are going to happen. Enemies are going to come. Embankments are going to surround the city. The city is going to be taken by siege, and not one stone is going to be laid on top of another. What is he talking about? He's talking about the siege that happens on Jerusalem in AD 70 when the whole thing is ripped apart. Walls are taken down. The temple is destroyed. But he's also talking about a spiritual battle. He's saying we're not winning here. If today, even today, he's saying, if you would just finally realize what would bring you peace, and what is he talking about? He's talking about himself. He's coming as king. He's marching into his city, and they don't see it. And he said, if you would just even turn today, even you, Jerusalem, even you who have been so marred by sin, if you would turn today, you would be saved from all of this calamity. So in essence, Jesus weeps because his triumphal entry for many will be experienced as judgment and not salvation. Too many in Jerusalem failed to see the beauty, identity, and kingship of Jesus. And so this is why that judgment is coming to them. Essentially what Jesus is saying is, if I am not your king, I can't be anything else for you. He's saying, if you would just today see me as king, then I could solve it. That I could come in, I could protect you. then I could heal you. Then I could come in and be your comforter and your counselor and your guide, and I could guide you into all peace. And if you could just see it today, then your life would be filled with my peace and joy, and you would have no more sorrow that is to come. But they don't see him as king. And if Jesus isn't your king, then he can't be anything else. Do we understand that? If Jesus isn't your king, where all attention is given to him, and all worship is given to him, and all obedience is given to him, then he can't be anything else. And this is so hard for us to wrap our heads around as very free Americans. We don't want to. Let me say it another way. He says, I can be your helper. I can be your healer. I can be your counselor. I can be your friend. I can be your brother. I can be your shepherd, but not without first becoming your king. Jesus wants to be all of these things for Jerusalem. Jesus wants to be all of these things for you, but only if you see him as king. And so we get to this point where we realize that we have a choice to make. And so the big question is when Jesus looks over your life as he looks over Jerusalem, does he rejoice over your life, or does he weep over your life? Does he rejoice because you've made him king and you worship him and you obey him and you give him all attention? Or does he weep over your life because you're still serving yourself as king? Because you've elevated something else as king over your life. And so he can't come in and be everything else for you because he doesn't sit on the throne of your life. Which one is it? When he looks over your life, does he weep or does he rejoice? I think one of the problems is we don't know how to worship and obey Jesus very well today. I think we know how to think about Jesus. I think we know how to study about Jesus. But I think there's something that we're missing in the way that we worship and obey him. And so let me show you a couple of things. A lot of people want to admire Jesus. They want to see him as a good teacher. He's a good man. He's a good speaker. He's got good morals. He could draw a crowd. He does miracles. And so we watch Jesus. We admire him for who he is and what he does. But there's a difference between admiration and worship. And so the question is, do you admire Jesus, or do you actually bow your heart before him and saying, you are the king, and I give my life to you? Okay, let me give you another one. Do you like some of his teachings, or do you desire to obey all of them? There's a tendency today to explain away Jesus' teachings as not the hard teachings that they are. There's a tendency to say, well, I don't need to obey all of them. Some of them are outdated. But no, he's king. And he came and he gave them to us. And so we've got to obey all of his teachings. We're not always good at it. But that should be our desire. And so I'll admit, I desire to obey his teachings, and yet I fall short of his example. But I still want him king over my life. The last one. Now, the Church of Christ, we're an analytical bunch, right? We like to study things. We like to learn things. We like to learn new philosophies. We had 2 classes start today. Both of them, I heard, went great. But do you study Jesus, or do you worship him? There is a difference. You can know all there is to know about Jesus, and yet he can still not be the king over your life. Knowledge does not equal kingship. And so we've got to get past this idea of we sit comfortably learning more about Jesus, meanwhile not bowing our knees and our hearts before him. Does this make sense? If he's going to come in as counselor and comforter and healer in your life, he has to be king first, and we have to worship and obey and give him all of our attention. And so does he have your attention? Does he have your worship? Does he have your obedience? What does Jesus do once he has all eyes on him? After his triumphal entry, what does he do next? It's fascinating because he goes to the temple. He starts turning over the tables. We know this story well. And he drives out those selling animals. And he says, my house is going to be a house of prayer. And we've memorized that, and we know that. Here's the fascinating part. When you drive out the money changers, you drive out the animals. Suddenly, what are they sacrificing? If there's no animals in the temple, then why did you go to the temple? If you have nothing to sacrifice. And then Jesus proceeds to stand in the middle of the temple and teach things that would be controversial. It's like he's daring them, come get me. Come get me. Because I'm going to be your sacrifice. You see, Jesus gets all of the attention, all of the worship, and all of the authority in order to be our sacrifice. Whereas the world sees a king. The world sees a king with arms extended, crown on his head, gold wrapped around him, elevated above everyone else. But our king has his arms extended, nails driven into them, a crown of thorns on his head, almost nothing wrapped around him, not elevated, but given the cross of shame. And he says, look at me. Give me all of your attention. Give me all of your worship. Give me all of your obedience. Because I am the God who can save you from your sin. I am the God that can heal you from the inside out. I am the God who can guide you in the way that you should go. I am the God who can give you peace and joy no matter what the circumstances. I am your God. Bow down and worship me as I give you my life. See, our King doesn't come in the same way. He comes triumphantly, entering in order to give up everything for us. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing what kind of king we have? And when I look at this, I just know that he deserves every bit of worship that I have. I always kind of feel like, God, I don't have anything to give you. Like, this is it. I tell Allison that all the time. This is it. But yet, it's enough for God. And so when we get to Revelation 5, I want to show this to you. It's a scene that John paints with his words. And he's talking about what is happening in heaven as Jesus gives his life on the cross. And here's what you need to know is that this scroll, this 7 seals, all of this information that exists beneath the 7 seals are the benefits for Christians. All right, they're the blessings for Christians. They're of what the promises that God has from the beginning of creation is what exists under these 7 seals. It'll make more sense as I read this. Then I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll?" But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside of it. I wept and wept because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll and look inside. And so here is John. We have another scene where he looks at the promises of God and they just lie at arm's length. No one can get to them because they're wrapped up in a way that just cannot be unlocked. And so John is emotional. He's ugly crying. He wept and he wept because God's people could not receive God's blessings. And then if we skip down, actually verse 5, then one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals." Then I saw a lamb, looking as if it had been slain, standing at the center of the throne, encircled by the 4 living creatures and the elders. So he says, don't weep, look. Look who's coming. The Lion of Judah. Right? Lion is powerful, mighty, can do anything, can take on anyone. Don't mess with the lion. Lion of Judah is coming. But what does he look like? He looks like a lamb who had been slain. A lamb who had been slaughtered, standing at the center of the throne. It's this fascinating picture, and it continues to go on in verse 9. And then they sang a new song saying, "You are worthy to take the scroll to open its seals because you were slain. And with your blood you purchased for God persons from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom of priests, kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on earth. Then I looked, and I heard the voice of many angels, numbering thousands upon thousands, and 10,000 times 10,000. They encircled the throne and the living creatures and the elders. In a loud voice they were saying, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain, to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise." When we look at this scene, it's amazing. God has so much promise for us, so many blessings for us wrapped up, and we can't get to them because of our sin. And Jesus comes as a lion with all power, who makes himself a lamb to be slain so that we can receive all of the benefits of God. And then what happens after that is just, I wish I could see it with my own eyes and hear it with my own ears, because all of these creatures, they look strange. They're all encircling the throne of God, and they begin to sing over and over again, and there's tens and tens of thousands of them singing, "Worthy is the Lamb." This is what worship looks like. Worthy is the Lamb who is slain. And he gets all of the power. He gets all of the wealth. He gets all of the wisdom. He gets all of the strength. He gets all of the honor and all of the glory and all of my praise. This is what it looks like to make God king in your worship, king in your obedience, and king in your life. God must be king. And so he comes to us today with all of the power of the lion and all the sacrifice of the lamb. And he comes to us today with a triumphal entry. And it's not the one that happened in Luke. Instead, it's the one that's happening now. It's the one where he says, "I'm getting on my donkey. I'm riding through the streets. I'm coming into the very center of your life. Will you bow down and make me king? Will you sing songs of praise? Will you give me everything that you've never given me before? Or do I have to weep over what I cannot give you? Do I have to weep over all of the work and sacrifice I've given that I cannot give you today?" God wants you to have everything. He wants to be your friend. He wants to be your counselor. He wants to be your comforter. He wants to be your healer. He wants to be the fortress in times of trouble. He wants to be the one who comes in and glues everything back together. But you have to make him king first. Let us make God king as we sing together about the splendor of God, our King and Father, this morning.
Let's stand together.
The splendor of our King, clothed in majesty. Let all the earth rejoice. Let all the earth rejoice. He wraps himself in light, and darkness tries to hide. It trembles at his voice. It trembles at his voice. How great is our God. Sing with me, how great is our God. And all will see how great is our God. And age to age he stands, and time is in his hands, beginning and the end, beginning and the end. The Godhead three in one, Father, Spirit, Son, the Lion and the Lamb, the Lion and the Lamb. How great is our God. Sing with me, how great is our God. And all will see how great is our God. How great is our
You are the God who is king over all the earth. Help us to trust that the King of the universe can be and needs to be king of our hearts, and allow us to invite you into our lives. We believe that you can reign in us, and that is the best thing for us because of all the promises that you made and showed to be true in your Son, Jesus. It's in his name that we all pray, and the church just said together, amen. Thank you all for coming. Let's sing this one out today.
Over all the earth, you reign on high. Every mountain stream, every sunset sky. But my one request, Lord, my only aim, is that you reign in me again. Lord, reign in me, reign in your power over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? Over every thought, over every word, may my life reflect the beauty of my Lord. 'Cause you mean more to me than any earthly thing. So won't you reign in me again? Lord, reign in me, reign in your power over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? Lord, reign in me, reign in your power over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? So won't you reign in me again? So won't you reign in me again?
See you next week.